if everybody would come in and sit down, and of course, this is a wonderful reunion here, but we do have a prelude of music, and so if you would all sit down and hear the beautiful prelude. Okay.
Or you can keep talking, that's fine. This is Jeff.
Thank you, Chris and Kelly. Good afternoon, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and a very special, heartfelt welcome to the friends and former students of Dr. Jeff Poelvoorde, who are here with us today. It's a privilege to welcome you all as we gather to remember and celebrate the incredible life of Dr. Poelvoorde, an esteemed member of our campus community. In preparing for today, I thought about a book I've been reading by Harvard Business School professor Arthur C. Brooks about the art and science behind happiness. In it, he states that one of the pillars of building a happier life is to, quote, engage in work with your whole heart. That work, at its best, is love made visible, end quote. There is no doubt in my mind that Dr. Poelvoorde is a wonderful example of someone who centered his career and his life with purpose and service. Everything for Jeff, to me it seemed, was a work of the heart. Through his passion for both teaching and studying American history, Jeff made a tremendous impression on many, many students at Converse over the years. Dr. Poelvoorde served at Converse for 36 years, joining the faculty in history and politics in 1986. He coordinated internships for politics majors and was the advisor for Converse's pre-law students. Dr. Poelvoorde served as the faculty advisor for the College Republicans, STAND, devoted to ending the genocide in Darfur, and MASK, our manga, anime, and science fiction club at Converse, a man of many talents. He was a tremendous scholar, and in 2000, Dr. Poelvoorde received the prestigious Catherine Amelia Brown Award for Excellence in Teaching. I know that we can all agree that Dr. Poelvoorde had a tremendous talent for keeping his students engaged. And how could he not, with special topics courses that range from Shakespeare to Don Quixote, War and Peace to Harry Potter. And that just names a few of the many, many special topics classes he taught. Personally, I had the honor of co-teaching a January term class on Alexander Hamilton with him at the height of the new musical's popularity. As many of you know, Jeff loved musical theater. And at the drop of a hat, he would bust into a brassy show tune with all the vigor and vibrato of Ethel Merman. While his skills as a showman were impressive, and you all know he would sing everywhere, in the halls of Carmichael, in the classroom, in his office, even in the bathroom. What was more impressive was his full-throat commitment to teaching and learning. When we would meet to grade assignments in his office, it was even the most basic reading response. He approached the work with full commitment and intensity. He graded papers like he was in a fight for the very future of our society, and that the feedback that he provided might be the last great hope we had for a more intelligent and reflexive world. It was truly amazing. For Jeff, teaching was more than a profession. It was a divine calling, and bearing witness to his passion made a deep impression on me, capturing the best of what our faculty do every day for our students here at Converse. Throughout today's memorial service, we will have the opportunity to hear from those who knew Jeff best, to share our own stories, and to find comfort in supporting one another. Let us remember Dr. Poelvoorde with the gratitude for the time we had and the privilege of spending time alongside him. And may we find strength in the community that he helped create. Once again, thank you all for joining us to celebrate the life of Dr. Jeffrey J. Poelvoorde. And now it's my honor to welcome to the podium my friend and colleague, Dr. Joe Dunn.
I should have made him clear that with me because they took all my good stuff. I don't know where to begin talking about Jeff. I will say I will. And Boone forgot. At the end of this event, we have a reception in Lee Parlor up in Main Hall, and that will be a time to continue to tell stories. And there are so many stories. That will be a time to. But anyway, I've limited everybody's talking, but I as a master of ceremony, I kind of cheated and gave myself more time. That comes as a shock. But I'm going to tell. There's so many stories. I could just tell a few, but I wanted to go back and tell the story of the hiring of Jeff. Back in those days, those ancient days, when we hired, we had big boxes and everything. People sent in their paper files, and they were thick files, and you would go through them, and then you decide who you're going to interview and all of this kind of stuff. Well, we went through the interview process. We went through that process, and we brought in two candidates that I must just say, Jeff's predecessor, Kent Brudney, was a good for 9 years. We had built the department. He was a great friend. I mourned when he left and went back to California. I thought I would never have a relationship like I had with Kent, and then came along Jeff Poelvoorde. So in any case, we had brought in two people. They were good. They were fine, but they were B+. They just weren't what I wanted. And I was very frustrated. I went back to one of the first candidates that came in was a colleague of Jeff's. Had been in graduate school together, and he had a 1-year appointment, and he applied. But he was the first one I was going to bring in, but he told me, well, they made my 1-year appointment into a full tenure track position, so I won't be coming for the interview. So, okay, so all right, so I went back over the two, had not been what I wanted, so I went back to him, and I said, could you not come? We might be better. That's interesting. He said, no, I've got this job, etc. My wife has a job. But you don't want me anyway. The person you wanted is Jeff Poelvoorde. That's who you want. So I didn't really know the name. So I went back to my box, and there in the box, I was a strict one. You turn in your thing by the right time, deadline. And there was need I say more? And there was a file. It was about that thick. It was back in with a couple of files. It had come in like 2 weeks late. So I opened up the file. And I've been around quite a while. I've been on a lot of committees, hiring, all this kind of thing. I had never, ever seen anything like this file. I mean, the testimony, all the kinds of things, all the places he had taught 1-year appointment. I used to say, we're the only person fool enough to keep you more than 1 year. But I could not believe it. I said, I have got to talk to this man. So I called him up. And it was an experience. And, people try to put on their best behavior when they apply for jobs. Not Jeff. I mean, it was wild. It was insane. It was here and it was there. And I have to say, I've got to see this guy. So we brought him down for an interview. And it was the exact same. He's not trying to put on his best behavior. No, he was off the wall, exotic, crazy, and just insane. We were taking him out to dinner. And so we went by the house while we were waiting for the department to go out to dinner. And so I took him by the house. I wanted my wife to meet him because I wanted her to sign off on this. She's a better character than me. I want to sign off on it. Well, anyway, my 4-year-old son was there. Jeff was down on the floor, crawling around, chasing him around the furniture, barking like a dog, pulling off his thumb. Just crawling around on the floor, wrestling with him. Okay. We hired him. And Jeff was here for years and years, living in Spartanburg, various places. It was always an adventure. Adventures such as during Sukkot, where he built his booth, and lived in his booth. And of course, Sukkot, that comes in October, and quite often the weather was bad and it was raining. But he lived in his booth during that time, much of the time built behind Carmichael. I remember during a rainstorm, it went on for a week, a rainstorm. You don't have to, in the Jewish tradition, you don't have to if the weather's bad. Not Jeff, rainstorm, etc. I had many meals in his Sukkot. So there was that. And then after several years, after being here, well, I have to throw out this one too. He worked out at the Y. 3 hours a day and such. He worked at the Y until 8 days. So at the end of the day, I would go in at 5 o'clock to work out, and he would already be there. And he had in this collection of men in various shades of dress, either stark naked, have a towel wrapped around them, about 7 or 8 people, and Jeff was holding court. He was Socrates in the forum. So he's talking and all this kind of thing. I'd go work out for an hour, come back out. They're still there. They hadn't moved. One time I forgot something with the wife, so I went back 3 hours later to get it. They're still there. He's holding court on Plato and the Federalist Papers, of course. So he had quite a following. He had quite a following at the Y. I had him teach a course at First Presbyterian Church for a year on a Jewish response to Christianity, Jewish Christian. He had a huge following. They're everywhere Jeff went. He had a following. And after being here and being twice the interim rabbi at the synagogue and the head of the religious school, it always scared me to think that Jeff was influencing 3- and 4-year-olds. But they knew an awful lot about the Federalist Papers. So he moved when the local synagogue went. He was Orthodox. He could bear conservative Judaism. He could not bear Reform Judaism. So when the synagogue went Reform, he was gone. He went to Charlotte, and the most conservative Orthodox synagogues, maybe anywhere. And so he lived there about 20 years. When I went to the funeral, a few of us in Charlotte for the funeral, and I came away just very disturbed because in that traditional Jewish service and from the community that he lived in for 20 years, Converse was mentioned like maybe once or twice, just mentioned. He taught at Converse. This just cannot be. We have got to have this memorial on campus, and we have got to talk about Converse. And because the two things in his life were his faith and Converse. So this germ, and here we are today. But a word about his commuting from Charlotte. He lived kind of on the top and the back side of Charlotte, an hour and 45 minutes away, if the traffic was good. Any of you driven to Charlotte lately about the traffic? And so he was always late. And he was always speeding. And he was always grading papers while he was speeding. Well, on one of the early times up there, he was stopped by a patrolman, North Carolina patrolman, stopped for speeding. And the patrolman came up to him and said, do you know how fast you were going? He said, I have no idea. He said, what? He said, I have no idea. I was crying. The patrolman said, you were crying. Probably stealing one of your stories. He's crying. You're crying? He said, actually weeping for joy. And he said, huh? He said, the republic has been saved. The Supreme Court has ruled on the election of 2000 and the paying chance and all of that. And George Bush is the president, and we are spared. The republic has been saved, and I was weeping for joy. The patrolman said, I've been a patrolman for 20 years. I've heard every story that you could imagine. That one is a new one. No ticket. But that wasn't the last time. Jeff got so many speeding tickets. The only reason he kept his driver's license was because South Carolina and North Carolina do not share reciprocity. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a driver's license. And they escalate. They escalate. I remember one of the last days he paid for a speeding ticket $600 for going 5 miles over the speed limit because he just kept. He was invited to the North Carolina Patrolman Christmas party. Well, I should say when the police would stop him, he would say, "Oh, how's the wife? How are the 3 kids? How's your dog?" All this. They knew he would think, and they invited the Christmas party. They said, "You know, you basically paid for it, so you should be invited." There are many commuting stories. He didn't like to wear pants when he drove down here, so he came in his boxer shorts, and then he would put his pants on in the parking lot behind Carmichael. Well, one day he did that. He came up there, he got out, he'd forgotten his pants. I think it was Ann Pletcher. She said, "Jeff, you don't have pants on." He goes, "Oh." So got back in his car, he drove to Walmart, he waited in his boxer shorts, he bought a pair of pants, came back to his class. Stories. I just can't even begin. I mean, other people will be telling all kinds of these accounts. I would say time was a very relative thing for Jeff. I mean, he was always late to class, but that's okay. He made up by staying on longer. We had to send up people. I mean, we had bells in the early days, and the bell was just a suggestion. It was kind of like speeding limits, kind of like stop signs, a suggestion. But people would say, "Dr. Poelvoorde, we have to go to class." He'd go, "Oh, there are other classes? People have other classes. Okay, go." But I would go up there, and we had to send people up. And I used, I just like speaking to the Hebrew speaking to the Pharaoh, "Let my people go! Let my people go! They got other classes." But then they would continue on. Then they'd come down to the office, and it was just, as Boone said, it was just an ongoing dialogue. Teaching was what he did. He was everything to him, wherever it was, in any situation of any kind. Okay, well, I could go on and on and on, and I will if any more stories. But to let other people have stories, what I'm going to do here is just read the tribute that I wrote when he retired. I just I changed it to past tense, and I had a couple of things to it. Now, Jeff was not one he could not take public honor. Public honor was something he just eschewed. He couldn't handle it. And he did not want to show up to hear that. It took every bit of pressure from the department. It took me, "You are jeopardizing our long 30-plus year friendship. You will show up. You will show up." Well, he wouldn't commit to it, but he did show up, and he sat in the back, on the back steps of Lever, where he always sat, because he always came late. He sat back there, and when I read the tribute to him, and made him come forward, I saw tears were just pouring out of his eyes. Jeff cried a lot, too. Tears were pouring. And in the one time that I visited his house, the mausoleum in Charlotte, I saw that behind the door was framed the tribute. It meant something to him. I was very happy for that. So I'm going to read the tribute here. Just put it in past tense. And some of it, Boone has already touched some of it, and I'm sure Monica will touch some of it. But anyway, glasses. He spoke at least 7 languages at various levels of proficiency, and that did not include Esperanto, some Klingon, and fluent Elfish. I once heard him and a Lord of the Rings aficionado student in an animated conversation in Elfish in the registrar's office, to the amazement of the person there. He was the most breathtaking mind that I have, or probably anybody has ever encountered. But as the movie A Brilliant Mind demonstrates, the borderline between genius and something other is ephemeral. He had no understandings of the basics of financial realities, and that was only the start of his naivetes. My mother, who loved him dearly when she moved here in her latter years of life, Jeff went to visit her quite often, which she loved. My mother loved him dearly, but she probably nailed it best in the characterization of him. As she said in good Southeast Missouri, "He doesn't have the common sense God gave a goose." But in his 36 years at Converse, we had the fortune to be blessed with a rare and precious treasure. Jeff was a teacher in the very best sense of the word. For him, it was a matter of the soul, heaven manifesting itself in this earthly existence. It was humanity at its most perfectible resonance. It was an elixir, and he was intoxicated in his art. Recipient of the Catherine Amelia Brown Award, Jeff won considerable acclaim here around the country, including standing ovations, teaching for more than a decade in the annual summer seminar at Princeton University's James Madison Center on the origins of the Constitution. His Constitution Day lectures here were magisterial. Undoubtedly, Jeff holds the Converse all-time record for 50 different course preparations. I was always afraid. He would see a movie. He would read a book. He would see something. And there came a January course. And they came from Boontuck to something, but there was Batman to, you could, all the kinds of things. But I knew one thing, and one thing clear. In every course, it would be centered in Plato and the Federalist Papers. Batman, Star Trek, whatever. It didn't matter. It was in Plato and the Federalist Papers. His number of participations in the Liberty Fund and other research and study seminars also sets a national record. Although never driven to assembling a scholarly portfolio, he simply did not care. He had a considerable record of book chapters and articles in both scholarly and more popular journals. Jeff was almost unconcerned with the normative things that drive academic careers, such as academic promotions and even salary. He had no idea what his salary was. He just knew that he received a check at the end of the month, and he needed to pay off in the next couple of his credit card debts. And then it was gone. And then there was me, his personal banker. As I strive to manage some of his finances, keep him from living on the streets, and for a time he did live in his office. One summer, when he came back from sabbatical, he moved into his office and lived there for the entire summer. And he wanted to stay continually. I said, you cannot do that. You cannot live in your office. He said, where does it say in the college bylaws? Where does it say? I said, well, it gets South Carolina law about, He said, where? Find it. But I finally talked to him about it. Just say, no, you will not live in your office. Especially since we had a brand new adjunct. She was just brand new on campus, and he stayed the night a lot. He's always, because he would hear late on campus, and he'd be driving back and things, so he would stay all night. And sometimes he would leave, and he would be so tired he'd stop at the rest stop. And sometimes he got home just in time to feed his cats and turn around and come back. One time he told me he spent 45 minutes at home after driving back and came back. But anyway, he came walking out in his boxer shorts, much to the shock of the. Anyway, as I said, told a friend of his at the funeral, all of this stuff was selfish, just to keep me from having to take him on and raise him after we retired. At one point, I suggested he needed to scale back, for the moment, some of his extensive giving to charity to pay off some of his credit card morass. He responded, the poor should not pay the price of my financial irresponsibility. That may have been the most archetypical characterization of who the man was. Throughout his career, Jeff never shied from total commitment to the liberal arts, academic integrity, and high standards. He refused to bow to politically correct whims of the moment. His allegiance to the eternal verities was steadfast. In honesty and the pursuit of the truth, Jeff was a role model for students and his colleagues as well. His effervescence and quixotic personality won him devoted devotees among a vast number of students over the years. Jeff was the kind of scholar-teacher, an individual totally devoted to the life of the mind and to the academy, an exemplar, unfortunately, in increasingly shorter supply nationally today. Jeff Poelvoorde was sui generis, and that about says it all. He has a successor, and a very good one, but no one can ever replace him. He was my colleague, my peer, my mentor. I was his banker, my best friend, and my blood brother. Those things remain everlasting. I miss Jeff Poelvoorde every day. Every day. Congress will never see the like again. Okay, Monica McCoy.
Good afternoon. Oh, wait, I'm short. I knew Jeff for 26 years. Trying to decide what to share about him today has been a challenge, because I think any of us could talk about Jeff for hours, and Joe kind of did. While I have great affection for Jeff, we certainly did not agree on everything. In fact, toward the end of his tenure at Converse, we disagreed pretty intensely about some of his views, and we argued a lot. But even then, I never doubted that he respected me and that he cared for me. I met Jeff in 1997 when I came to Converse. He was hard not to notice. He was loud, he was passionate, he seemed a little bit crazy. My first encounter with Jeff was at the opening meeting for faculty and staff on my very first day as a professor at Converse. We were meeting in Hartness Auditorium when Jeff spotted my colleague, Dr. Jan LaFrancois. He ran over to greet her. The fact that I was seated between them, with about an inch between my knees and the chairs in front of me, did not stop him. He simply climbed over me, banging me with his bookcase. He saw someone he cared about, and he was going to show her. He was never shy about showing his affection to the people he loved, even if he had to step on other people. As I got to know Jeff, I was, like many, first drawn to his extreme intelligence. As our friendship developed, I listened to him speak at meetings, I sat in on his classes. Not only was Jeff brilliant, but he was constantly learning. He wanted to know, to understand everything. As we started to spend more time together, it didn't matter what we did. Jeff wanted to discuss it. Like from attending a play to watching a stupid sitcom. Any activity was followed by hours of discussion about what it meant. What was the author trying to communicate? Why did the director stage the scene that way? How did I feel about it? Why didn't it make me cry? Me, not him, he was crying. It could be exhausting, but I have never thought so deeply about the things I experienced. What you may not know about Jeff is that he identified as introverted. This crazy, over-the-top man who danced on the circulation desk at the library. As I got to know him, he admitted that he was often very uncomfortable in social situations, and he masked that discomfort with this crazy behavior. So spending time with him was always interesting. Once we were attending a performance of Don Quixote at the Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium. And as we're walking down the aisle trying to find our seats, Jeff decided that we should waltz. I have no idea. There was no music, but we waltzed. Another time, at a Greenville Braves game, we all stood to sing the national anthem. The first verse of the national anthem. After everyone else sat down, Jeff remained standing and continued to sing at the top of his voice the entire, there's 4 verses to that sucker, the entire national anthem. And like at first, the crowd around us was really uncomfortable. Like, but then they got on board and started cheering. I was like, please do not encourage him. But Jeff was patriotic. As Joe mentioned, his patriotism at least once got him out of a speeding ticket because that poor, very confused cop, who eventually, he and his wife had twins, welcomed them to the family. Jeff knew all about it. So his patriotism got him out of that speeding ticket. But spending time with Jeff, it was amazing how often patriotic things came up. When most people talk in their sleep, it's typically nonsense. Let me tell you, when Jeff Poelvoorde talked in his sleep, he frequently quoted the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. He loved those documents. How deeply he adored them became evident when we decided to co-teach. No matter what class we taught, I knew I was going to be reading the Federalist Papers. Jeff and I co-taught 3 times. Our first class was Psychology, Politics, and the American Musical. We both loved a musical theater, and we both thought it provided a wonderful lens through which to explore human behavior. So during Jan term, we would stage the musical with our class every Monday night, and then we would spend the rest of the week interpreting the plays in light of psychological and political literature. You won't be surprised to learn that co-teaching with Jeff was an intense experience. Never have I fought so hard for the chance to speak in a class I was teaching. At times, I had to literally forbid him from speaking so I could cover the psychology material. The students in the class seemed to fluctuate between being amused and possibly traumatized. Although I will say, it might be the only time a Poelvoorde class was dismissed on time. When it came to grading, as President Hopkins mentioned, I was like, I'll grade the psych papers, you grade the politics papers. No. We would both grade everything. Like, all right. So we made copies of the first paper. I graded them, he graded them, and we got together. And it went something like this. Jeff, first student, I give the student an 88. I'm like, oh, me, excellent. I said 87, that's amazing. What did you think of the next student? Jeff, wait. Why did you think it was only an 87? I'm like, 87, 88, it's the same. I don't care, we can go to 87.5. But I want to know why you thought it deserved an 87. And I would like to explain in excruciating detail why I thought it deserved an 88. I cannot tell you how long it took us to grade papers. I may have been guilty of trying to get him to say his grade first, and then just saying that I thought that exact same thing. Oh no. Why do you think we both thought a 92? As I said, Jeff thought deeply about everything. At the end of the classes we co-taught, I only hoped our students learned as much as I did. Ultimately, our religious differences made it impossible for our relationship to continue. I know that many students, many I'm looking at now, and more than a few faculty and staff, were hoping for a wedding and a happily ever after. But it turns out that the gap between Catholicism and Orthodox Judaism is a significant one. Still, I am glad I knew him. And even though it was hard at times, I'm glad I loved him. My life has been richer for having shared it with Jeff Poelvoorde. Thank you.
And now for a musical interlude. Jeff, and of his many things he loved music, and above all, he loved Beethoven. Chris, would you like to introduce our performance?
Sure. As we've heard, if you didn't even need to know Jeff to know how much he loved music, you could be within 150 yards of him. And if you talked with him for more than 5 or 10 minutes, you knew that he especially loved Beethoven. And so it would have been very, very wrong to have a commemoration without some music of Beethoven. And so performing the Adagio Cantabile movement from Beethoven's 8th Sonata in C minor is Junior Aidan O'Donnell.
Now we have three alums speaking. I will have to say first, the first who is not here today is Nitu Bagchi. Nitu Bagchi, a song. I hate these married names. Nitu is the purest protege of Jeff, in that she went to the University of Virginia, where he got his PhD. She studied in the same tradition, I think maybe even with some people, in one or two cases, and has gone on to teach in political theory in the very same ways that Jeff has, and teaches special topics, all the kind of things. She was as close of a clone. By the way, Nitu was from India, and she told the story too that Jeff took a 3-week trip on a study trip to India and came back speaking better Hindi than the native Indian. But anyway, her mother had a heart attack in India, and she is now in India taking care of her mother, so she had to pull out of this. I chose three people who had different aspects of Jeff. We could have had 184 people with different aspects of Jeff. But anyway, the next will be Dr. Holly Johnson, who has... Jordan. Well, after all, I'm going to steal probably one of her best stories. She said, after all, Jeff married me twice and divorced me once. She conducted 2 of Jewish weddings and 1 Jewish divorce. But anyway, Dr. Jordan, I will let you speak.
I'd stand on this box, but I move too much, and you guys don't need to see me break an ankle during this. I think it's fair to say that Dr. Poelvoorde set the tone for the entirety of my time at Converse. He was the first professor of the first class I attended in Carmichael 200, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1 to 1:50, where I sat second row back, left of center, every time. As we were waiting for him to arrive on that first day, a professor who I now know to be Dr. Young came in and announced that it was our professor's birthday and that we should start singing happy birthday when he walked in. And then she just left. We decided to trust her and went for it. So when a tall, slightly disheveled man we assumed was our professor, hidden behind a pile of books and papers, came flying into the classroom, we burst out in song. It was the day before Dr. Poelvoorde's 51st birthday, so I doubt he was expecting us to sing, especially from a classroom of freshmen who didn't even know him. And as you might expect, his face scrunched up in that way that only his could, and he burst into tears, threatened to rip off all of his clothes, and started to dance around the classroom like a ballerina. To reiterate, this was my first moment of instruction at Converse College. That semester was a difficult one for me. I was struggling in my science course that semester, and I was realizing that my plan to be a biochemistry major was not going to work out. And I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. It was during this first course with Dr. Poelvoorde that I began to find a possible answer. That class, Ideas in Culture, was a then required 2-part course that covered the history and major works of the West. As the weeks went by, I realized I wanted to know everything this man said in this class. Gilgamesh, the Torah, Socrates, Augustine, Peter Abelard. I still have every note, test, handout, essay, and book from that class, along with the materials from the 5 other courses I was fortunate enough to take with him. I declared my politics major at the end of fall semester because of him. Joe likes to take credit for that, but he's wrong. And those 5 courses were magic. You never knew which version of him you were going to get that day. From the incredibly focused version with his eyes closed as he talked and talked and talked until he got to the point, or the completely stream of conscious all over the place version where he would completely get off topic for 60 minutes and then slowly have to get back to the point of the class that day. But it didn't matter which version you got. You were going to learn something for the next 75 minutes, and you were going to love it. I hope no one who taught me in the past in this room takes issue with this, but Dr. Poelvoorde was the professor that taught me how to research and how to write. While Dr. Dunn taught us to refine our writing, to cut it down, be more succinct, use tighter language, Dr. Poelvoorde led us through the process of crafting an argument and justifying it. And he modeled it for us in every moment of his courses. His class notes showed us how to break down a text, find the thesis and supporting arguments. His syllabi had citations. And even if it was hard to read because he had graded your paper in the car, writing on the steering wheel while driving to and from Charlotte, he didn't just tell us what we needed to improve. He always told us what we did well. After Converse, I went to UGA and earned a Master's of Biblical Judaism and Hebrew Bible. And every single day of that degree, I used the skills of close reading and textual analysis he gave me. The best days in Dr. Poelvoorde's classes were always the ones where we spent an entire class analyzing a single word in the text. Its literal meaning, its hinted at meaning, its buried meaning, and sometimes its secret or hidden meaning. I learned in my time at Georgia that he had been teaching us ancient Jewish methods of biblical interpretation and had been applying them to whatever we had read that week. My life as a professor began at Georgia. As happens with many graduate students, I was thrown into teaching my second year, having been given nothing by way of preparation other than, here's a simple syllabus, go for it. I spent that summer thinking a lot about what kind of a teacher I wanted to be. I thought back through all my high school and college professors, and I made lists of what things I would do and what things I definitely would not do. There are bits of so many of you in this room and the teacher that I am today. But much of who I strive to be in the classroom and during office hours comes from him. Dr. Poelvoorde didn't just teach. Somehow he manifested knowledge. There was passion behind every word he said. And I knew I wanted to channel that energy of his that as a student had made me listen no matter what the topic. And like him, I always tried to make time for my students to talk after class, to provide them a safe space to struggle with concepts or to get advice the same as he had done for us. But Dr. Poelvoorde wasn't just a professor and a mentor to me. He was also my rabbi. Like Dr. Poelvoorde, I am a convert to Judaism. We converted at about the same age, and as I went down the path of finding my Jewish identity, I found in him a kindred spirit. 5 years after Converse, 3 years after my conversion, and 3 months before I started my doctoral program, Dr. Poelvoorde served as the rabbi for my wedding. And let me tell you, my rehearsal was a disaster. After showing up very late, because he was driving through traffic from Charlotte all the way to Atlanta, you know him, he had to get everything out of his system. So during the rehearsal, he was going on random asides that had nothing to do with the task on hand and was saying all the things that he knew he couldn't say during the real thing. It got to the point where my family actually took me aside and asked me if I was sure if I wanted him to do the ceremony. And I was like, trust me, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And it was. He gave me the perfect ceremony. He had terms for that ceremony, of course. There were certain parts of the service that, as a practicing Orthodox Jew, were non-negotiable for him, no matter how liberal and reform my former husband and I were. And there were things I added to the service to make it more egalitarian that made his eyes roll. But at the end of the day, it was everything I wanted. He understood that his audience was mostly not Jewish and took the time to explain every step of the ceremony in a way that was welcoming and gave everyone a hint of why he was so important to me. None of us expected the news that he was gone. None of us knew we had already seen him for the last time. The last day I saw Dr. Poelvoorde was 3 days after I defended my dissertation. One of my favorite things to do, as some of you know, is to just randomly show up on campus and surprise people. And that's exactly what I did that day. I saw several of you that day and was honored to be invited to eat lunch in the dining hall at the professor's table. And I want you all to know how special it was for me to be celebrated by you all and to be able to thank you for helping me get to that moment. After lunch, I headed down to Carmichael, hoping to catch Dr. Poelvoorde between classes. I ended up staying and sitting in on an entire class. I'm so grateful I got to see him so close to my defense, so near to the end of my journey as a student, that in so many ways had started with him. I'm glad I got to tell him in person that I'd done it, that I'd finished my political theory degree, and to thank him for introducing me to the studies I love. And I'm thankful that I got to sit in on one last lecture with him in my seat in Carmichael 300. It's hard for me to think about the politics department without him. But the more I think about it, the more I realize he wasn't just ours. He belonged to all of us. The politics majors weren't the only students who loved him. He was a professor for the misfits as well. The non-majors who heard about a man down the hill who taught classes on Lord of the Rings and allegedly spoke Elvish and Klingon. They would show up to these challenging graduate-level courses completely outside their majors and would commit completely because he created a space where it was encouraged to be weird, to study the things that we loved, and to receive validation that these passions were worthy of academic study. I'm one of the lucky ones. I was a major, and I was a misfit. And he meant the world to me. I miss him so much, mostly because I didn't expect to be missing him so soon. In our faith, when someone leaves us, we say, may their memory be a blessing. Jeffrey Poelvoorde was so many someones to me. He was my professor. He was my mentor. He was my rabbi. He was my friend. And he was a blessing. May his memory be a blessing to all of us who knew him and loved him.
And now from a little bit different perspective, Brandy Blanton.
So when I was initially tapped earlier this week as a replacement, I immediately thought about the first story I was going to tell. It was spring of my junior year, in the lead up to exams, so clearly tensions were high. I was stressing about if I would graduate with a 3.7 GPA, the minimum requirement for several programs I was applying to, and a number that I clearly thought was going to define me for the rest of my life. I had very little wiggle room to be able to afford to make anything below a B and still make the average I thought I needed. As I never did particularly well on Dr. P's exams because I am his protege and not having my life together, I went to him during office hours to see if he had any advice on what exactly I needed to be studying, since of course our PRQs for scripture and politics were all over the place. And he had already given me my one and only C of my academic career. Even in graduate school, he gave me my only one. And I didn't particularly want him to give me that second C. It took about 10 minutes for both of us to realize we weren't getting anywhere. Despite him telling me I was going to do fine, I knew the material, and that if I just looked over literally all of the readings, I would be even more fine, I was an inconsolable wreck of tears and stressed out overachiever, crying in the middle of the history and politics office. Dr. Poelvoorde responded in literally the only way he could, by laying on the floor and making carpet angels. Now let's pause for a second and paint a complete word picture of this. There's me in that little armchair that was in the little lobby in between all the offices, absolutely sobbing in the fetal position. And then there's Dr. Poelvoorde, flailing about on all four of his limbs, the yarmulke and that faded Red Sox cap falling off his head, all while he was yelling, "I don't know how to help you!" So, when I was asked to make these remarks, this was what immediately flashed in my head. Him laying in that floor, screaming about not knowing how to help. The difference was, now he was telling me he didn't know how to help me through this moment. For the record, though, I think that the Carpet Angels did help because I ended up with a B in that class. I'm sure that we've all got stories of times we went to Dr. P for help and got it in varying degrees. He always had a joke and a kind word for all of us, no matter what we were going through. He was always there for us. And I do mean literally. I cannot tell you how many times we saw him at midnight in the Montgomery Student Center because he was grading papers, lost track of time, and was still on campus. Or I'd be leaving the library because I got kicked out because it was closing, and lo and behold, the light was on in his office. When I found myself at the University of St. Andrews trying to find a thesis topic, I reached out to Dr. P for his opinion. I had a short list of ideas, and 3 of the 5 were all pop culture related. We know Dr. P loved his popular culture when it came to teaching political philosophy, and it was something that he encouraged in all of us. I regret only getting to take his Batman and politics class, but it wasn't like his love for pop culture stopped in those courses. I remember referencing The Life of Brian in a scripture and politics paper. And there is absolutely no way I'm the only one that referenced pop culture in an unrelated class. Going back to that thesis, Dr. P encouraged me to do one of the pop culture topics because that's what I was most passionate about. Who cares if someone else might look more professional on my resume, or if my classmates kept looking at me like I was literally insane when I would bring up space wizards and superheroes in super serious conversations about terrorism. Dr. P pushed me to be authentically me, something that he was every day. While he was a fan of my Batman estate-sponsored terrorism topic, I ultimately went with my Rogue One paper, which has opened so many doors and wonderful conversations for me that I never would have written it without Dr. P's encouragement, just to be myself. Because of that paper, I've gotten 2 jobs. I've been invited to speak countless times at conferences. I was the only one of my classmates that won a award for their dissertation, something that absolutely ticked them off because they could not believe I wrote about Star Wars and terrorism. But I think encouraging us to be ourselves was something that he did for all of us. He was certainly a character that we'll never see replicated. He managed to somehow get us to all take him seriously while wearing sweatpants, 1 inch too tattered for Goodwill, and a faded Red Sox cap over his yarmulke. Speaking of that hat, was it ever new? This isn't a rhetorical question. Actually, you know what? I don't even want to know. I like the idea that it appeared already tattered, faded, and begging to be replaced out of nowhere, and he just shrugged and put it on his head. His ball cap was as much of his personality as jumping on top of high surfaces and singing show tunes. A lot of us here today probably have a story that involves him randomly belting out a tune or two. My personal favorite of the songs he would sing on repeat was Springtime for Hitler. If you want to talk about shock, you should have seen the faces on some of those non-politics students every time he would go into that one. I almost feel like having to watch at least 2 Mel Brooks movies should have been a prerequisite to take Dr. P's courses, because he also loved the history of the world. I mean, or if you hadn't seen any Mel Brooks movies, you should have needed to be able to pick out and explain some of the things on his door. It was full to the ceiling of notes, cards, and messages from students, mostly involving his favorite bits of popular culture. I can't imagine going into the department now and not seeing that door covered in his memories. Dr. P was also so authentically himself, I had a hard time trying to decide what stories to tell today because I wasn't sure what would be appropriate. Other contenders, which you can ask me about later, include him hiding in a bush, him being utterly convinced I was Mormon for years, the PFWA and marriage proposals, Trey Gowdy, Anna Karenina, V8 energy drinks, barking, meowing, replacing the national anthem with the Meow Mix theme song, and the time we as a class rebelled against him and told him he was wrong, which he took in stride, and of course, because he was a lifelong teacher and he loved to learn from us as well. I think that as we are remembering Dr. P, we also need to remember that he was always one that was authentic with his emotions. He was not afraid to cry, and he often would when we watched movies in his class. While I know that he would want us to laugh about him, he also wouldn't want us to be afraid to cry. And if that didn't help us work through our emotions today, maybe we can try and make some carpet angels. I'd like to close with a quote from one of Dr. P's favorites. Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of the fellowship in Middle-earth, Gandalf says to the gathered companions. Go in peace. I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are evil. Thank you.
these stories, I am reminded that Dr. Woodman taught for a year at the Air Force Academy on sabbatical. And while he was there, he would tell his colleagues about Jeff Poelvoorde. They did not believe it. Nobody like that exists in the human race. Yes. The other thing I have to mention, because I said earlier, was Jeff's love of his cats. And that some of you know that 3 of them, Mordecai the first, Mordecai the second, and Esther, are buried under the magnolia tree next to Carmichael. And as Jeff would come into work, he would stop quite often to say a brief prayer over his cats. But anyway, our last speaker is Aaron Smith, who comes, again, another different perspective. We'll get you your...
No, I'm good.
Aaron is injured, so Aaron Poston Smith.
Told you, I tried my whole up. In the words of Dr. Jordan, I was a misfit. I was not a politics major. It wasn't for lack of Dr. Poelvoorde trying. However, I'm really honored to be able to get up here and speak as a student of his, and I am just humbled to hear the happy stories and the laughter, and I'm so thankful that I can share in your grief, because grief comes from a place of love, and those that you don't grieve for haven't made an impact. And what an impact he's made. I just look at the tears that have fallen and the laughter that's erupted. That's just a little flavor of what he did for his students. Dr. Poelvoorde's legacy in the Converse community cannot be understated. And I'm just one drop in this enormous ocean of nearly 40 years of educating. Just one little drop. And I'm so thankful for that. Now, anyone in this room that was lucky enough to take a class with Dr. Poelvoorde can very easily tell you many, many stories, as we've heard already, and I'm looking forward to the reception to hear a whole lot more. Unlike Dr. Poelvoorde, I promise to stay on track. On more than one occasion, after 40 minutes of Dr. Poelvoorde, this is great. Can we talk about it over lunch? Is it going to be on the test? Because I'm also taking the honors class with Dr. Dunn. So I took my freshman year, I had the Ideas and Cultures class too. Your first semester, you don't get to pick anything. So I have my book list, and I take it to the bookstore, and for that one class, there was 11 books. I was terrified. I had already heard about the intensity of this professor, and I'm purchasing more books than I can even carry, and I'm getting ready for this intimidating class. Now, looking back farther than I would like to admit, I see that his intensity had nothing to do with the material on his syllabus. It had nothing to do with that. It was his dedication to the growth of his students. He had an uncanny ability to see the strength in his students that they were unaware of. And he pulled those strengths out, sometimes painfully. He pulled them to the forefront. Now, those of you that know me, I have an identical twin, Rebecca. Now, she did not have Dr. Poelvoorde for the first section of Ideas and Cultures. When we registered the next semester, I told her, you have got to take this class with Dr. Poelvoorde, because he had made such an impact on my academic experience in one semester that it was life-changing. He was funny, high energy, dedicated to his students, and demanded that each of his students find their strengths, and not just by carrying 40 pounds of books to class. Dr. Poelvoorde was completely shameless. In his quirkiness, he held nothing back in the classroom or in his boxers anywhere else. His willingness to be exactly who he was, no matter who he was around, was inspiring and inspired. In a class full of fledgling scholars, awkward, self-conscious, there were no topics off limits, no questions that he felt were inappropriate, No dance move, too cringy. I read recently, as you get older, you don't get cooler. I disagree. You don't get cooler, you just care less about what people think about your level of coolness. And if that's the definition of cool, Dr. Poelvoorde was the coolest. He was funny. My first year of Ideas and Culture, some students and I, because he was late and we kind of needed something to do other than twiddle our thumbs, it was a beautiful day outside. And so we took it upon ourselves that we wanted to have class outside. So while we waited, we began to move furniture from 300 to the roof of the theater down below. And as we are stepping through the windows, he walks in. I don't know how he knew that I was the culprit, but I can hear him to this day saying, "Dr. Poston, you started a little too late getting your furniture moved. So next time, plan a little further ahead, and we can make this happen." More than intelligence, humor, the ability to take a power nap under his desk during lunch. What will always stay with me is his wholehearted 200% investment in what he held most dear, which was his students. He believed in his students and their abilities, and he believed in me. As an 18-year-old student from a town literally smaller than the academic population of Converse, just the undergrad program, not including graduate school, I walked on campus excited and intimidated about my college career. And in large part because of him, I walked off of campus excited and confident that I could take on the world, and I wasn't afraid to do so, just like he did in his classroom. And I am so thankful for that, because very many people do not get that in their college experience. He was more than a teacher. He was more than a colleague. He was a friend, a mentor, and for those of you that work with him, and those that you were lucky enough to study under him, he became part of our family. How blessed was he to have all of us as brothers and sisters that loved him to the degree that we did. But how lucky am I and you to be part of that family, because that's what he saw. We weren't his students. We weren't his colleagues. We were his family. And he would have been so excited to look in this room and see the Jeff Poelvoorde family reunion. So I've thought a lot about the best ways that I could honor Dr. Poelvoorde's life, and the best way that we as a community, a Converse community, can honor his life. One thing that I'll treasure as long as I live, and this is what I've arrived at. In the same way that he invested in us, I challenge everyone in this room to do the exact same. Invest in your passion, your talent, and invest your energy into others, and just hope that you have a smidget of the energy that he carried around daily. Invest into your children, whether it's your actual children or the family that you adopt, like Dr. Poelvoorde adopted us. Be willing to invest mental, physical, financial resources, your time, into things that you believed in. You will make the world a better place, just like he did. And when you look around this room, know that your grief is only a reflection of how much Dr. Poelvoorde believed in you. You are the person who can change the world. You can do that, in large part because of him. Thank you, Dr. Dunn.
I want to remind you of the reception coming up in a few minutes, and it will be an opportunity for many, many, many more stories. One thing before Holly Jordan will give the final prayer. Boone once said about Jeff, he said when he heard about his death, a light has gone out, a light has been extinguished, and that is correct. And for those of you, I hope you who did not know him and have heard of him today, I hope you understand that light, because you didn't have the opportunity to share in that light. There is a part of your life you will never know. It's just not reached its ultimate and maximum. For those whom he touched, it was a light. And those of who knew it knew that light. But many of you did not have the opportunity for that light. But now, at least maybe you know what you missed. And now Holly will end with prayer.
It wouldn't be a gathering about Dr. Poelvoorde if I didn't take a moment to teach about what I'm about to do. The mourner's Kaddish is the traditional prayer recited in honor of someone who has passed. Immediate relatives will say it 3 times a day throughout the mourning period and once a year in their honor on the anniversary of their passing. The prayer is nearly 2,000 years old and requires a minyan or a quorum to recite. I don't know how many Jewish people may be in the room today, so we're probably breaking some rules that would make his eyes just roll and his skin crawl. And the fact that the eldest son is normally the one that needs to do this and a woman is doing this would also probably upset him, but also delight him as well. The reason we require this quorum is that mourning in Judaism is a communal practice where we come together to support those closest to the person who has left us. It is a core prayer in our faith, and it is said during every service. I love this prayer because it isn't sad. It doesn't focus on the loss, but the future. The text praises God and God's ability to bring peace to the world. One of the lines I love the most translates to, "May there be abundant peace from heaven and life for us." In some congregations, only the immediate family stands. In others, everyone stands to support the family. I invite you to stand if you wish. And please, if you know the prayer, please join me. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabah, bi'alma divra hirute, v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon this is killing me, guys. Uvyomehon uvchaye dichol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uzvizman kariv v'maru, amen. Yehe shmei rabba mivarach le'ala malame almaya, it barak v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei dekidasha brihu. Le'ilah min kol birhata v'sharata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran bi'alma v'maru, amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'maru, amen. Ose shalom b'romav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'maru, amen. Thank you so much for letting me share this with you. Amen.
And now, thank you all for coming. I hope that you found this a very experience. We will now move up to the hill, to the parlor, to continue stories in remembrance.